Hello, Natasha, and hello, everyone. This is the time for ExpaTalk, and today we're talking environment. How are you, Natasha?
I'm very good, really excited about our guest today.
Yes. Uh, can you tell us about Azzam? I know Azzam is one of the 100 forward thinkers, and he's an environmentalist, and I always stumble when I say this word. I don't know why. and
Um,
he is the one who restored life back to the marshes in Iraq. Such an achievement, and I am, as an Iraqi, so proud of this man.
yeah, I mean, my story with Azam was it's funny. I was, here in the US watching 60 Minutes and, flipping the channels, and I stumbled upon this news report about an Iraqi man who used to live in the US, came back to Iraq, and he restored the Iraqi marshes. And I saw a video of him canoeing, on the river,
Oh, yeah.
between the marshes. And I
Yes.
was looking at the place. I was like, oh my god, this place is like heaven on earth. This
Mhm.
is so beautiful. I really want to go there. And I was like, this man is fascinating. How did he manage to do that? And years later, maybe 5 years after that, I was in the Dead Sea in Jordan
Mm.
with some of my friends. And then they introduced me to this man. He was a mutual friend, and we were talking. I don't know how the issue of the Iraqi marshes came up, and I was like, "Oh my God, are you the same man that I
Wow.
saw on TV?" And I was like, blown away. I mean, this amazing man who did this work, that I get actually to meet him in person. So we chatted a lot about it, and then in addition to talking about that, he's like very, very smart, wonderful, very kind man. And I remember he told me something. I remember until now, maybe 6 years later, we were talking about happiness and living in the moment. And he looks at me, and he looks at, we were sitting in front of the Dead Sea. I'm like, see the Dead Sea, this moment that we're living, this is happiness. You're enjoying nature. This is how you define happiness, is living in the moment. So he was actually one of the first people that made me think about the concept of mindfulness, about
Yeah.
living in the moment, about enjoying
The
nature,
here and now.
the here and now. And
Yeah.
so Azam is just a fascinating guy, and I don't want to talk. I can talk forever about him, but I know the audience want to hear from him. So without further ado, let's just bring him to the studio.
Yes, please. And Azam also is very famous for talking about climate change and the calamities that are coming over to the region because of climate change, shortage of water, evaporation of the waters, and a lot of other troubles that people are not even aware about them because of all the political issues that are happening there. So let's bring Azam and talk to him. Azam from California, Los Angeles, California, joining us right now. Welcome, Dr. Azam.
Hello, everybody. How you doing, guys?
Hello. Hello. We're doing great and we're very happy to see you. Good to see you. It's an honor and a privilege to have you over in our podcast.
Thank you for your kind words. I listened to the introduction. I'm not really that great, guys. I'm just
No,
an
you
average
are.
guy, but okay.
You are.
Thank you very much for the compliments. I really appreciate it, and yeah, it's been a privilege the last 25 years, 25, 21 years, no, 19 years actually, coming back to Iraq, working on the marshes and issues of the environment. Anyway. Uh, yeah, I'm thankful for your gracious introduction, and let's get to
You're
the
welcome.
subject matter.
Let's cut to the chase.
Let's cut to
Uh,
the chase. Exactly.
the story of the marshes, I think a lot of people know about it. They know what happened to the marshes during the 80s when when an ecological disaster has been created over there. And then life almost gone. The inhabitants of that region had to flee the area, finding refuge somewhere else. And then after 2003, the restoration process started to come back again to the marshes, and thus life came back. This is the story in a nutshell, but we want to hear from you. And then also, we want to hear as well, in addition to the progress in that area, there are also calamities and disasters coming, environmental disasters coming to that area. We want to hear from you about those disasters as well. So the stage is yours, and go ahead, sir.
Zyad, it's dangerous to give me an open-ended question because I'll talk forever.
So tell us in a
So
nutshell what happened in the marshes and how did you restore them back?
I did not restore the marshes. Let's start with this way.
Okay.
The marshes were restored by the Marsh Arabs. I only helped in identifying areas where we can actually get a bigger bang for the buck, given the limited amount of water available. Anyway, let's talk first of all about the marshes. What are the marshes? The marshes are essentially a natural retention basin for floodwaters. The Tigris and Euphrates, the eternal Tigris and Euphrates meet in southern Iraq, and every year during the flood, a huge amount of water comes. 60% of the water of the Tigris and Euphrates comes in the spring. All that water cannot get to the Gulf, so essentially what you have is a water world in the middle of a desert. And this is what gave life to an area that should be, by all other accounts, barren. Look at the satellite pictures and you'll see southern Iraq to be green in the middle of a desert. Why? Because of the presence of water, because of the presence of the fertile soil, but more importantly, because this flood comes in every year and it heals the farmlands. It absorbs the salt water that comes in, that gets created by evaporation. It deposits a new layer of silt and clay, renewing the vitality of the farmlands on an annual basis. The Sumerian forefathers celebrated these floods by celebrating the goddess of fertility, Ishtar. They understood the importance of the floods. It's a lesson that we have forgotten. In fact, our engineers of the past century, and one of them was my father, spent their lifetime protecting cities from floods. The entire infrastructure of Iraq is built to protect Baghdad and other cities from floods. This has saved the cities, but it has resulted in a very slow economical death of our farmlands. Our farmlands are being salinized. The desert is encroaching, and we are losing productivity. We historically have been the breadbasket of this entire region. We now are dependent completely on oil. We sell oil, and we buy food. We don't eat our own food. All right.
So this problem is starting. When did it start? Is it starting now because of climate change, and that's how it is affecting this region, or it's desalination? What is exactly happening in the region that makes it so dire over there, so
All right.
dangerous?
So, like anything else that is complicated, there's not a single. It's not a single issue. It's an accumulation, right? We have a history now in Iraq for the last 70 years. We have become 95% dependent on income from oil, instead of our history, which was basically based on exporting food and our trade links, connection between Basra and Europe, between Iran and the West Jordan and the Levant. That was our history. Our history was we made a living through this way. When oil was discovered, it became easy life, and so right now, I mean, we jumped in from the marshes and their history to the current danger, which is I think is more important than talking about the history of the marshes. Look. CO2 is increasing. Everybody's talking about climate change as a threat to the entire world. So essentially, the world is now embarking on a 10, 15, 20 years process to lose its addiction to carbon or hydrocarbons. In other words, in 10 years, the demand on oil is going to be decreasing slowly but surely. For
I'm showing,
the
as you speak right now, I'm showing some pictures from the marsh areas. For those who don't
ah
know about the marshes, they can see them while you talk, Azam. So these images are taken from Al Jazeera satellite channel in English, and these images show life in the marshes after they have been restored.
Well,
I
okay,
apologize for interrupting.
let's just go back one step before we start talking about the climate change. Let's talk about
Sure.
the fact that these marshes are essentially a retention basin, is what we talked about.
Yes.
What has happened is, in fact, over the last 30 years specifically, lots of dam has been built upstream. Inside Iraq, we have huge lakes, Tartar Lake, Habbaniya, Razaza. All of these lakes were designed in order to contain the flood. But the biggest threat right now to the future of the marshes and agriculture in Iraq is, in fact, huge dams upstream, both in Iran and in Turkey. The flood is no longer. We no longer have floods in Iraq, and we are not going to have floods for the next 100 years or so until these dams get decommissioned. That said, in essence, what is going to happen is that this water is being hoarded by neighboring countries, being redirected. But at the same time, our population, today we have 39 million Iraqis. In 2030, 10 years down the line, not very long, in 10 years, we will have 52 million Iraqis. And if we continue going the way we're going right now, we'll have 80 million Iraqis by 2050. Double the number of people that we have now. At the same time, the amount of water available is less. So the demand is increasing. The quantity, let's not talk about the quality. The quantity is constant or less. And at the same time, we are losing income because of the fact that demand on oil is decreasing. So we have a triple whammy coming up, hitting Iraq just at the right time. Well, in fact, we are not getting prepared. We're not preparing ourselves. Well, we're not even aware of the problem, let alone getting prepared for preparation. You need to recognize that, in fact, there's a problem. Most Iraqis are not even aware of most Arabs are not even aware of the coming danger to our area. The marshes have been restored. Actually, they have been reflooded. They have not been restored. That flood action that comes in every year in order to renew the vitality of the farmlands is no longer. But it also has affected, in a way, the biology of the marshes. I'm not going to waste time with your audience on talking about what has happened for the marshes. The marshes are restored. The marshes are essential. There's a refuge of a sort that will continue to exist because, in fact, and I argue that, in fact, these marshes do not belong to Iraq. They belong to the entire world. Along the shores of these marshes is where writing was invented, where the wheel was invented, where Abraham was born. This is a World Heritage Site. Literally, it was declared by UNESCO as a World Heritage Site precisely because our civilization, our way of life, in fact, is rooted in the area around the marshes. Now, is it going to continue to exist? The answer is yes. In a different state than they were originally, but they will continue to exist. What I have learned over the past 18, 19 years is that nature is incredible. She has resilience. She is able to heal herself very easily. All we need to do is step out of the way and let nature
Heal herself.
Heal itself.
Heal herself.
Azzam, when we were chatting earlier before the show started, you said something that really resonated with me. And I've, as always, everything you say resonates with me. But you mentioned about the threat that's happening to us, and we are busy fighting each other. Different sects are fighting each other, and they don't realize that the biggest threat that is going to come to us, it's not a political threat, but it's the climate threat. And I've been thinking a lot about it, especially what happened with the COVID era that we went through, and the post-COVID era. We were all like busy fighting ourselves, and we didn't even recognize that pandemics were waiting for us and actually hit us out. We felt it came out of nowhere, but pandemics have been in the work for a while, and we were not paying attention. And millions of people died. And for me, is that what's going to happen with us as well, especially in the region when it comes to climate change? It's gonna come out of nowhere. We're not prepared, and millions will die. I'm sounding very alarmist here, but I want to raise the alarm because this is how people listen. That if we do not do anything now, people will die. Can is this an accurate statement?
I don't know about dying, but I know that there's going to be a lot of dislocation. I know that there's probably if we don't adjust and address the issue, there is going to be famine. There is going to be conditions in this region similar to what happened in Eastern Africa back in the 80s. Let's set that aside. Let's talk about climate change. Is it happening or not? I submit to you that we are in the midst of climate change. If you have noticed over my lifetime, temperatures are increasing. Summers are a lot hotter in Iraq than they were in my time, in my youth. Winters are a lot less cold than they used to be before. Salinization is happening because of many things, but including increased. The sea water is rising. Because of loss of water in the Tigris and Euphrates, the salt wedge of the Gulf is migrating upwards into Basra. Remember what happened in 2018 in Basra with people drinking salt water, essentially seawater. So climate change is a fact. It is slowly being recognized. The world has recognized that, in fact, climate change is a phenomena that is related to CO2 or the production of carbon. And it is now moving towards losing the dependence on hydrocarbons. The United Nations has declared in its annual report last year that Iraq is the fifth most vulnerable nation in the world to climate change. Can you believe that? We are the fifth most vulnerable nation in the world to climate change. How did they come up to this conclusion? Well, let me tell you. Seawater is going to rise. Basra may become like Venice, maybe even southern Iraq. The marshes may become actually saltwater marshes if we don't do something about that. Number two, the desertification will continue. There is going to be a lot less water. But the biggest issue that the United Nations bases conclusion on is the fact that Iraq's economy is completely dependent on the production of oil. We produce oil, we sell it, we get the money, we buy food. In fact, this entire region, the Gulf, even Dubai, even Jordan, in your case, even Jordan is dependent on oil in an indirect way. A lot of Jordanian expats work in the Gulf. If in fact oil industry is collapsed or does not exist anymore, all these expats that are working and dependent on working in companies that service the oil industry are going to lose their jobs. They're going to go back home. There's no income. What are you going to do? The fact is our region is completely dependent economically on solid oil. We have nothing else. Yes, we have some. I mean, Dubai says that they are only 3% dependent on oil. I submit to you that that is a wrong factoid. The fact is, a lot of companies that work in Dubai are dependent on are existing to service the oil industry. So our dependence on oil is the biggest threat. Combine that with the fact that there is going to be less water. Combine that with the fact that there's going to be increased demand on this water. And then the result is a disaster. Why? Because people are going to leave their farms. I'm going to talk about Iraq in particular. People are going to are going to leave their farms because the farms are not producing. They don't have income. They're going to go to cities. The cities right now are incapable of handling the population they have right now. So what's going to happen in 5 years, 6 years when the population of the cities is going to double and there's no work? There's going to be theft, disorder. A lot of people are going to migrate out. Look at what happened even to Russia in the 1990s. A lot of people migrate out instead of dealing with the chaos of the cities that was happening there. And I can assure people that Iraq is not going to migrate to India or China. They're going to try to get to Australia, New Zealand, Europe, elsewhere. Remember what happened in 2019 with the Syrian crisis. So before the dying is going to happen, you're going to have a lot of dislocation with people migrating out, seeking a better life. So what we need to do right now is think of adjusting. Well, first of all, you need to convince Arabs and Iraqis in particular that in fact climate change is an issue. They're not even aware. I mean, we still base our economy, our entire budget is based on selling oil and spending it in salaries that will be then translated to food and other goods being imported. So, is the situation dire? Is there no solution? The answer is, rest assured, there are solutions. What is missing is the political will to execute the solutions. I say to people, go ahead.
Sorry, Ziad, if you want to say anything. I
Yes,
mean,
I,
yeah, go ahead.
sorry, I was about to ask something, maybe something additional, because you've been also raising awareness regarding another issue, which is the coming water bankruptcy in Iraq. And you said that Iraq, the land of the two rivers, Mesopotamia, which is known by its famous Tigris and Euphrates, is going to run dry of water one day, and Iraq will start begging for water. This is another issue that is added to the other problems that you've mentioned about. So maybe if you can shed more light upon this, please.
Well, I don't think Iraq is gonna. I don't think the Euphrates and the Tigris are gonna run dry. They are going to have less water, that's for sure. As I just mentioned, the entire structure of water management in Iraq is based on flood control. We have one lake, Tartar Lake, that has a surface area of 3,400 square kilometers. Okay, 3,400 square kilometers is bigger than the Dead Sea. Multiply that by 3 meters of evaporation on average every year, and you will see that we evaporate 7.5 billion cubic meters of water from that one lake. To put it in perspective, the entire water budget of a country like Jordan is 6 billion, 7 billion cubic meters of water. We evaporate from that one lake more than Jordan uses its entire year, and add to it the other lakes. So
And
that
what's the
is
reason behind this evaporation? What is it, because of mismanagement or because of climate change?
uh, I wouldn't call it mismanagement. For every era, there is
Or is it a host of reasons, like
it's
the
like
building
everything
of
else. It's
dams in
complicated.
Turkey and whatnot?
It's a lot of reasons. So the main
Okay.
reason is, in fact, these lakes were created for flood control in the 50s and the 60s. That was needed at the time. That was before the era of dam building. Then there was added to it dam building that kind of changed the nature of the Tigris and Euphrates. And then you have increased temperatures now. The temperature is increasing, so evaporation is increasing. So it's like slow. It's like the frog in the water in a water pot that's being heated. We don't feel it immediately, but in reality, we are boiling and slowly dying without really noticing it. And so what I mentioned here is that, in fact, evaporation losses, if in, well, okay. So I just mentioned that evaporation from Qatar is about 7.5 billion cubic meters by itself. The Ministry of Water Resources is predicting a shortfall of about 10.8 billion cubic meters of water a year in 2035 because of the increased demand that I talked to you about, and
Yes.
the predicted increase in agricultural use. So if we save that 8 billion cubic meters, we solve 2/3, maybe more than that, 75% of the problem.
But how? How do you save that?
Here is what I have suggested in a paper I published in October of last year. If we somehow reach a lease agreement with Turkey to lease their dams or to buy electricity from their dams, we then can save Iraqi water in Turkish infrastructure. Okay? So we are leasing storage space. And thus, we will make 8 billion cubic meters available for use instead of being evaporated in the air. It is thinking outside the box. Now, people will accuse me or have accused me of saying this is essentially giving Turkey control over Iraq. My answer, ladies and gentlemen, I have news for you. I am not giving Turkey anything they don't have right now. Turkey can store all the water and cut off the Tigris and Euphrates for at least 3 years if they want to do harm. What I am doing by
Why? Because the
creating,
rivers starts in Turkey. Both rivers
yes,
come
the
from Turkey.
headwaters of the majority of the headwaters are in Turkey
Absolutely. Yes.
and Iran.
Mhm.
So the point is, I am actually not going to be paying for water. I am going to be paying for leasing rights, and in fact, I'm going to buy electricity. The price for that lease, by the way, is not oil. It is in fact going to be by giving Turkey access to the Gulf through transit rights in Iraq.
Mm.
So I'm essentially creating a codependence indirectly between Turkey and Iraq using trade versus water management.
Mhm.
In fact, what we can do in the future, so one of the solutions for what are we going to do in the future for our economy in Iraq, I am saying that southern Iraq will become forests of photovoltaic cells. Those who live in Jordan understand, those who live in Morocco, those who live in Egypt even, understand that the photovoltaic energy of our portion of the world is 3 times the photovoltaic energy in Europe. In other words, a photovoltaic cell installed in Germany costs the same as a photovoltaic cell installed in Iraq or Egypt or Morocco.
Yes.
But it will produce 3 times as much electricity over its lifetime than it would elsewhere. So for the same cost, you have 3 times the production. That's a lot of energy. So I see Iraq in the future producing photovoltaic energy. And with the photovoltaic energy or electricity that is not sold, what we can do is use it to generate hydrogen from the Gulf water, salty water, and that hydrogen can be the battery because using hydrogen cells, you can produce electricity at night when there's no photovoltaic energy. And in the winter, when in fact your day is a lot shorter than the summer. So Iraq's future economy is going to be based on exporting energy, clean energy this time, as opposed to hydrocarbon. Number two, trade by connecting Basra to Europe through Turkey and east-west Ufuk by connecting China through Iran to the Levant, to the Mediterranean. So east-west, north-south. And then by doing management properly with Turkey on water, I can tell the Turks, look, this water that you are using for agriculture in Turkey, you're only producing for 4 months a year because the mountains, you can't really grow much in the winter. But if you use that water to produce food in Iraq, you can produce food 12 months a year. And so we can actually become the breadbasket like we were in the past. We will become a trade route like we were in the past, and added to that, export of clean energy. So along these 3 pillars, we will continue to be vital to the world. And in fact, we have a solution that deals with climate change and benefits from climate change, ironically.
Mhm.
Mhm.
Okay, but what we need for that is political will. Political will is not going to materialize when in fact Iraq is what essentially
Fragmented.
Iraq, well, it's Iraq currently and for the last 20 years has been the battleground between 3 forms of political Islam.
Exactly.
Before that, we were the forefront, as it were, defending pan-Arabism against the
Mhm.
Yeah.
Iranian threat. Now,
Yeah.
what we are is we're the battleground between 3 forms of political Islam: Wilayat al-Faqih, Wahhabi Islam, and then Ikhwan Muslim in its version in Turkey. I don't want to go into too much
Into
politics, but
that details. Yeah.
the fact is, we are the battleground. I mean, I understand when the politicians don't have the bandwidth to absorb the need for reforms for a coming threat 10 years from now, when in fact the threat that they are facing is today ISIL taking Mosul. Who would have thought of that? Who even predicted that? So I do not blame the Iraqi politicians for not having the bandwidth to absorb and understand the future threat because they are dealing on daily basis with an incredible different. I mean, you have lack of electricity, you have democracy that is causing people to demand and wanting. You know, I disagree with a lot of Iraqis in the fact that they think that it is their right to demand a house. The government does not provide houses anywhere in the world, maybe except the communist countries. But anyway, that's another issue. So let's concentrate let's concentrate on the issue of the threat that is facing Iraq, but not only Iraq, the entire region. I just mentioned Wilayat al-Faqih. I just mentioned Ikhwan Muslimin. I just mentioned Wahhabis. What is the common? I mean, they're competing, right? But there is a common threat. The common threat is, in fact, the departure of the world from the use of hydrocarbon. That's a threat to Iran's economy. That is a threat to the Saudi economy. That's a threat to the entire economy of the region, including Turkey. So,
and this is one of the issues that I'm going to talk to you about, the regional environmental threats, which is one of the axes that we're talking about today. But before going there, allow me to interrupt you, please, because of the time as well. And because also we want to talk later on about the blueprint for the future. And
I just gave
that will be Natasha's topic. So the salt wedge, before moving to the regional threat, I want to talk with you also about the salt wedge of Shatt al-Arab. What are the possible solutions? You've been warning against this for a very long time. Can you give us solutions, please?
And what is the salt wedge? Let's talk about what is the salt wedge for audience.
Exactly. Define the salt wedge and give us solution for the benefit of our valued audience.
All right. So Shatt al-Arab is a river created by the meeting of the Tigris and Euphrates. As long as it has enough water, it pushes the Gulf water and keeps the Gulf water at bay. It keeps it in its place. Historically, the water flow is so big that, in fact, it is enough to keep the salt wedge at bay. What people don't understand is that Shatt al-Arab, the bottom of Shatt al-Arab, is minus 10 to 12 meters below sea level, right? It's actually, if there's no water flow in the Tigris and Euphrates, the sea will come all the way to Basra. What has happened over the past 20 years is, in fact, the flow of Shatt al-Arab is decreasing slowly because of increased demand, because of dams upstream. So as a result, the salt wedge is moving up. How does it move up?
Because from the Gulf.
From the Gulf. It is now a fact of physics is that salt water is denser than sweet water. Yes. But as long as there is enough push, and there's enough velocity of the Tigris and Euphrates, there's turbulent flow, so we can push Shatt al-Arab. What is happening lately is, in fact, the water of the Tigris and Euphrates is so little that there's no turbulence. So the water is flowing on top of the salt wedge. So the salt wedge is moving upwards slowly as the water of the Tigris and Euphrates decrease. Now, after that, it is predicted that the Gulf is going to increase in height by half a meter to a meter, depending on the model that you're on. But essentially, the water will rise. And during what happens also is that you have tidal action. The tidal action is plus or minus 1 to 1.5 meters. So essentially, if untreated, if unaddressed, salt water is in fact going to reach Basra. What's the solution? Solution is putting a barrage, a regulating barrage on Shatt al-Arab. The problem is Shatt al-Arab is common between Iraq and Iran. That was one of the issues of the Iraq-Iran war. All the way to about maybe 20 kilometers south of Basra. South of Basra, the border goes. So we can put a barrage there. But if we put a barrage only on Iraqi side...
What's the barrage and how do you make this barrage?
Barrage is, so like the Thames regulation. If you visit London, there is south of London, east of London, there is a controlling structure, a structure that has gates. And the gates are closed during high tide to prevent the seawater from coming in, and it's opened in low tide to allow the water to flow out. So a similar structure is needed on Shatt al-Arab to prevent the salt wedge from coming up. The proper place to put it is at the mouth of Shatt al-Arab, where it meets the Gulf, but that requires cooperation between Iran and Iraq. At this current point, there's not enough money to do it. They're not feeling the threat, but there are discussions between Iraq and Iran eventually on building a regulating structure to deal with this issue of the salt wedge migrating up. If, by the way, and people say, what happens if the Shatt al-Arab becomes salty? Well, what happens is that the groundwater becomes very salty, and eventually the groundwater will percolate through the soil using capillary action. And in fact, you're going to lose the entire southern Iraq Peninsula, the Fao Peninsula, to salinization.
Yes. So
Uh,
go ahead, Natasha.
uh, Actually, my question is a bit about the mindset of Arabs and Iraqis in general. Can you hear me?
Yeah, go ahead.
Sorry. It's about the mindset of Arabs and Iraqis in general, where, as you mentioned, they're dealing with the day-to-day threats. How are you gonna convince them that there's another threat is coming? Because our culture is most of the time, you would hear stuff like,
Allah Kareem.
Allah Kareem, Allah بفرجها, المكتوب على الجبين بتشوف العين, like all of
Just leave it
these.
in the hands of God.
Yeah,
I mean,
and how are you?
that's one option, Natasha. You can leave it in the
Yeah,
hand
I
of
mean,
God,
how?
and then
Yeah, but how are
deal
you
with
gonna
it.
convince them? I mean, how are you gonna? I mean, the idea of convincing the population that a huge threat is coming while they're actually dealing with another sort of threat day to day basis. I mean, it's really hard
Busy
to.
fighting each other. That's the issue.
I mean, how
Okay.
are you
So
gonna?
the Natasha, the answer is partially through channels like yours, through media, through talking, and not accepting no for an answer. I can assure you that people at the highest level of the Iraqi government have listened to me personally, and in fact are convinced that what I'm talking about is true, is valuable. They understand that some of the ideas that I am presenting require incredible political capital that may not be available right now, especially given the competition going on between the various forms of Islam. But I can tell you that the entire region will start feeling the problem when the income starts getting reduced. Iraq had a preview of that for the last 3 years. Now Iraq is now the oil prices are getting up because of the economical restoration after COVID. But there is no doubt in anybody's mind that in fact oil prices are going to drop. Now, when the oil prices are going to drop, places where it is expensive to produce oil will go out of production first. Like fracking in the United States will stop. That will reduce the amount of oil presented. So we're gonna have a jump. So people are gonna say, oh, they're gonna confuse the jump with, oh, what you're saying is wrong. Well, the jump is momentary only. Eventually, the North Sea oil is going to be too expensive to produce. That is going to get out of the equation, and there's going to be a jump because, in fact, it's a supply and demand issue. But over time, as you plot the oil prices, there's no doubt that it's going to be downward projection, downward. Maybe Iraq will be the last country will produce, Iraq and Saudi, where the cost of producing oil is very minimal. We will be the last countries producing oil, and maybe we'll continue producing oil, but the price of that oil is going to be minimal, and it might be actually even taxed by the World Trade Organizations, by the world, because in fact they want to reduce carbon in the air. That is what is causing climate change problems. So have no doubt demand on oil is going to decrease. Iraq is going to need a different income source. And and I can tell you that politicians understand this threat. They are just not willing at this point in time to invest the political capital in the very difficult decisions that are needed, mostly political. I mean, how can Iraq get an agreement with Turkey when in fact Iran wants to control Iraq? That common threat of competition versus coordination. Today and tomorrow, we have King Abdullah and President Sisi visiting Iraq to talk about the Levant uh, uh, region, i.e., increased trade in between East and West, which is fantastic. It's a step in the right direction. But I also want to have trade between North and South. Imagine if our gas or our green hydrogen that is produced in southern Iraq is in fact transported all the way to Europe. That is a source of income, first from generating hydrogen, Second, for providing that energy. Producing hydrogen is going to be a lot cheaper in Iraq than it is in Europe. You can produce it anywhere, right? But producing it in Iraq is going to be cheaper. We can compete with Russia for providing Europe with alternative energy. In fact, today we can actually compete with Russia by sending the gas that we are currently burning. We're burning about $100 million a day of gas in southern Iraq. Anybody that has visited southern Iraq sees the big flares of gas. Why is that being flared? Only God and the Iraqi government know.
Okay, I think it's time to talk about the regional threats, environmental threats.
Well, we kind of partially talked about that,
Okay.
and throughout the discussion, we've had a multi-layered discussion, so
Yes.
it's fantastic that way, in a sense it's basically what Iraq is, the different layers of Iraq, from its historical role to its current role to its future role. Look, ladies and gentlemen, Iraq is eternal. Go ahead. Go ahead.
I want to ask you about a paper that you published, which you called it the Blueprint of Levant. I think you published it last year, if I'm not mistaken.
Well, it wasn't called the Blueprint. It was called it's the briefing paper that I wrote for the American administration, the coming administration, on how to change the dialogue from competition to codependence. And the solutions in that paper were based on regional solutions, i.e., how to create codependence economically and politically instead of the political competition.
And this was to the Biden. This was to the Biden administration.
Well, at the time I wrote it, we didn't know that Biden is going to win, but the projections were, in fact, the Democrats are going to win. And had the Democrats not won, then the paper would be unused. But as it stands right now, the paper has been reviewed, and we're getting questions.
Well, yeah, I mean, look, what was the feedback from the paper? I mean, what was the impact?
Great ideas. The ideas are fantastic, but is there political will to do it? The answer is right now there's no political will. But slowly, surely, there is going to be a political will, because the threat is real. It's not an imaginary threat. And so there is going to be, with that threat, as the threat becomes more and more real, you're gonna have people responding, and the solutions are going to be grabbed on. In fact, by the way, Natasha, 10 years ago, 12 years ago, when I talked about hiring Mosul for building ELISO, I mean, I suggested at one point in time that Iraq should help Turkey build ELISO to remove Mosul, which is a huge threat to Baghdad. I don't know whether you're. You want to talk about? Let's talk about Mosul. Mosul Dam is built on top of 200 meters, that's 600 feet, of gypsum impregnated soil. What is gypsum? Gypsum is it's a chemical compound that is extremely solid when dry. It is like glue when it's dry. So we have bedrock, 200 meters of bedrock, that's gravel and sand glued together with gypsum. So it's solid. Then you introduce water, gypsum starts dissolving. All of a sudden, what was rock becomes its component, right? What was bedrock becomes its component, which is gravel and sand. Then you have piping. So since Mosul Dam was built, it was built in the wrong place. The Iraqi engineers knew that it was being built in the wrong place. But the Iraqi engineers had to build it during the Iraq-Iran war to protect the front lines from being flooded by, at the time there were no dams upstream in Turkey on the headwaters of the Tigris and Euphrates. So Iraq needed to build that dam in order to protect the front lines from flooding. As a result, since it's begun operation, Iraq has been needing to grout, i.e., drill holes underneath the dam and push cement and sand in order to replace that gypsum that is being dissolved. So this is a 1.5 kilometers long dam, being undermined actively all the time by the water migrating below it. If that dam fails, our models show that even the old city of Mosul, which is 20 meters above the level of the river, will be flooded. Imagine a tsunami. that is migrating from Mosul Dam all the way down to Baghdad. Baghdad, within 3 days, will be under about 5 to 6 meters of water. Okay? What does 5 to 6 meters of water? Nobody's going to die immediately because people are going to have alerts before that. They're going to move to the second floor of their houses. But imagine a city as large as Baghdad without electricity, where all the storage of food is ruined because water has flooded the stores, where there is no car operating because they have been flooded. There is no water. The water is full of sewage and dead cats and dogs and what have you. Within 10 days, you're going to have people dying of cholera, starvation, because there's no food. So a failure of Mosul Dam could affect not only Mosul, but Baghdad, where a quarter of the population of Iraq live. That is essentially a nuclear bomb getting ready to be exploded without knowing when. We are not going to have that much of a warning. Now, the Ministry of Water Resources will tell you that the dam has been fixed, but they are now actually operating with the idea that they will never fill it more than 75% of its capacity. So if it was fixed, why are you not using it at full capacity? The reason is because it ain't fixed. It cannot fix it. There is no long-term fix for the Mosul Dam except decommissioning. But Iraq needs the water. So what do we do? In 2008, I suggested that we should sponsor the building of Eliso, and have that Eliso replacement for Mosul and having the nucleus of cooperation between Turkey and Iraq. At the time, I was accused of being treasonous to Iraq. Well, today, it turns out that I wasn't treasonous. I was very nationalistic because I was trying to think of the future and protecting Iraq's interest from long-term harm. I.e., I was thinking in the vision. I was envisioning the future when people were living in the present at the time. It's okay, no big deal. The idea is still capable of being executed. Instead of building the Eliso Dam, we can lease it. And in fact, by the way, if we actually empty the reservoir, we don't need to remove the dam. If we empty the reservoir of Mosul Dam, we can grout at leisure. We can fix it without having that threat of a bomb exploding without us knowing when it's going to explode. You see what I mean? So we can leave Mosul Dam and have it as an emergency catchment if you reach an agreement with Turkey on operating rules for Eliso Dam. The idea, I hope, will be discussed in future negotiations or current negotiations, I'd say, between Turkey and Iraq. But the political situation in Baghdad still does not allow for a full rapprochement, as it were, between Baghdad and Ankara because of the previously mentioned political competition between Iran and Turkey on interest and influence inside Baghdad. But the idea is good regardless of who is in control of Baghdad. It is intrinsically anybody that knows about geopolitics and knows about engineering will understand the correctness, the wisdom embedded in these ideas. So at one point in time, I have no doubt that they will be picked up and executed by a future politician, if not today's crop of politicians.
Yes. I have a question from one of our audience, and I think I know it doesn't concern. It's not about Iraq, but I think it has some connection to it. They're asking about from our friend Samah Al-Zahabi. She's talking about Alberta oil, and I think she's mentioning here fracking.
I think that was in regards when he was talking about what's going to happen with oil production in the US after they stop fracking, and then you're going to have different regions of the world, and he never mentioned Canada oil, and I think he wanted to get what's going to happen.
Samah is from Canada.
Yeah, Canada's oil is also expensive. It's not that cheap. Yes, you have lots of water. You're blessed with nature that way. And yes, you have sands. Actually, you don't use fracking per se. You have something similar, but use a lot of water to produce that oil. that oil is expensive. It's not cheap compared to, say, to Iraq. I think my latest, I'm speaking from memory, so forgive me. Actually, I'm not going to speak from memory. I will not expose myself to that. But I know that the Iraqi production of Iraqi oil is the cheapest, one of the cheapest in the world, just like
Yes.
Saudi.
Yes.
Canada will continue producing as long as it makes anybody. It's not just Canada, Venezuela, the United States. Everybody will produce as long as there is profit. If there's no profit, people have no interest in investing money, especially in the West, when in fact production of oil is not subject to government control, government sponsorship like it is in the Middle East. And so Canada will continue producing after the fracking stops in the United States or becomes uneconomical. So Canada will continue to produce, but there will be a certain point in time in the future when the demand worldwide today is about 90 million barrels a day on average. And the United States consumes 25 million barrels a day, so about a quarter of the production worldwide. Now, by the way, cost of oil is not the cost of production only, but also cost of transportation. So Canada can continue selling its oil to the United States because of the distance, right? So the economy is not just about production; it's about getting the product to the market. The United States production continues, even though the cost of production is higher than Iraq, simply because it's cheaper to deliver it to where it's being consumed in the United States.
Yes.
So the economy of oil is really complicated. It has many different layers. Venezuela is right next door to the United States, and actually the United States buys oil from Venezuela, does not buy it. Anyway, it's complicated.
Yes.
The point is the oil economy is shrinking. Let's accept that. It is shrinking because demand is decreasing and will continue to decrease. That's a simple fact. How fast? Well, people tell me, I've heard about peak oil back in the 70s. True. But climate change is the new variable that was not there before. And climate change is being felt on daily basis around the world, from Bangladesh to southern. I mean, do you realize that our models indicate that the Gulf will be uninhabitable in the summer? Do you know that some models predict 70 degrees temperature in the Gulf? You know what 70 degrees
I have read that somewhere, and also in Iraq.
Your blood will boil.
Yes.
I mean, guys. So without electricity, you cannot live. So this is the common threat that was not felt before. And I will.
Sorry to interrupt you, Azzam, but
Yeah.
what are you saying is very scary. So I wanted to ask you, what would you say to climate change deniers? And climate change deniers they're not only in the Arab world.
That's a very good question. Very good question, Natasha.
I mean, we have them in the US, US politicians or Arab world. They're everywhere. So so you're telling us, Azzam, again, sorry for interrupting you, but you kind of, I felt my heart like fall down, because you're saying all the people in the Gulf, their blood is gonna boil, literally.
In the summer.
I don't know what in the summer. I don't know in how many years when it becomes 70 degrees Celsius. So tell me, what are you gonna tell the climate change deniers? They're gonna tell you, oh no, haki fadi, as we say in Arabic.
Okay. So you cannot convince 100% of the people on any given subject. Right? There's going to be. That's why we have different opinions. Now there is science, and if you are willing to listen to the science, even the science community, there is a small percentage, 1% of the science community that is saying, look. There is uncertainty in your models. You are basing your models on data that is not certain. Okay, that's even within the scientific community there is disagreement, minority disagreement. Majority is agreeing. That doesn't say, by the way, in the science that the majority is completely right. It has happened in the past where the scientific community over time changed its position as new theories come about. But besides that, let's look at oil in a different way. What I say to people, oil was produced by nature over 3.5 billion years. It took nature to create that oil, about 3.5 billion years of flora life on the planet. The floral life converts maybe 1% of the solar energy into structures that gets buried. Eventually, we produce oil. We are lucky to extract maybe 50% of that oil. The rest of it stays in the ground. So we are using, over the past 300 years, actually, over the past 150 years, we have used 50% of the battery that took Earth 3.5 billion years to produce or to create. Isn't it wise to reduce the usage of this battery until you have a different source of energy? So even if you don't believe in climate change as a phenomenon caused by CO2, just the principle of conserving the battery that you have, doesn't it make more sense to use it more wisely? Now, unfortunately, this kind of talk does not create the urgency needed to act, right? Battery, okay, we have fracking, we have oil sands, we have shale, we have the Precambrian era of oil that we can continue to produce. It's costly, but we can produce. So it creates this kind of talk removes the urgency needed for action today. So, but I will talk to climate deniers that way. Look, don't make it about climate change. Make it about wise use of natural resources. Beyond that, for political action to take place, you don't need 100% of the population. Heck, you don't even need 70% of the population. You need 50% plus one. So the action will be taken. Right now, unfortunately, we don't have democracy in our part of the world per se. We still have people who use the strength of the country, the strength of the armed forces to dictate the political will. So the only path available to people like me is to talk to those who hold the power of decision and try to convince them of the common threat. And that's why I take the tack I'm taking. Look, this is a common threat. This is a threat to your country in 10 years, in 15 years. And by the way, politicians are listening. I mean, listen to the green. Go on the internet and look up the Green Hydrogen Initiative of Saudi Arabia. Look up the 50 billion tree initiative for sequestering CO2 in plants. There are a lot of actions that are being taken in order to deal with the effects of climate change. What is needed is unified action, unified vision that disregards the old model of political competition in favor of the European model of cooperation and codependence. It took Europe 2 world wars to come to the conclusion that competition and military confrontation is a lose-lose scenario. Are we gonna need 2 world wars in the region to convince us that in fact cooperation and codependence are the way forward? Or are we wise enough to read history and understand that in fact our future is embedded in our past that had no borders, that had trade as a basis for our peoples to live, trade as well as food production, were our historic way of making a living in the Levant. And in fact, it is possible to go back to our past to find the blueprints for our future.
That's amazing. So these are the final thoughts, and a lot has been said today, and a lot of threats are coming over to the region if they remain unaware or
Zyad, let me interject here. Zyad,
yeah.
your role, the role of the media, cannot be understated. You have the responsibility
Yes,
to make the people of our region and expats understand the dire situation we're in.
absolutely. And
Without
this is what I wanted to ask you. That's my question, the last question. What do you want from us and from the people in the Middle East to do regarding this particular topic?
spread the facts. Just talk facts. Here is what's going to happen if we don't do anything to deal with the situation. Speak about the fact our economy is facing bankruptcy, literally bankruptcy, from
Yes.
lack of income, from oil. We are facing not a water crisis. We are we are facing water bankruptcy. A crisis indicates that it's just an asthma. It's just a momentary problem, and we will deal with it and we'll move on to better times. What we are facing is bankruptcy. Bankruptcy means that your income is less than your expenditure. So what we are facing is bankruptcy. It's not a crisis.
Absolutely.
So what do you do when you have a bankruptcy coming up? You cut your expenditure. You try to improve your income. It is time to act. Increase your income and reduce your expenditure to avoid bankruptcy.
Yes.
Wow.
I'm speechless. I really don't know.
I'm actually scared, and I keep thinking about the education system in the Arab world, and even anywhere in the world. I mean, are we teaching this to the kids?
No.
You know, who are growing up?
No.
Do they know what's
No,
going on? Is that what we're putting in the books?
No, I don't think so. But right now, we don't have the time to work on the next generation. What we have to do is work on today's crop of politicians to create the political will needed
Yes.
for creating the solutions. Long-term teaching is a luxury people with white hair don't have.
That's right.
Of course they do.
But
Yeah,
you have that responsibility, unfortunately.
No,
for
there
you,
is. I have some here.
But
Azzam, it's been a pleasure and
my
honor
pleasure,
to chat
my
with
pleasure,
you.
and my honor
And
to address your audience. Thank you
thank
for
you.
this opportunity,
Thank you so much.
and I look
I
forward to
know.
other discussions.
Yes, I know you're traveling, and I know you're always on the move, and I know how it feels when you give us an hour of your time to talk about
Thank
a very, very serious issue like the environment in the Middle East. So thank you so much for your
Thank you, Azzam. Thank you
joining
so
us.
much.
Thank you, Natasha. Thank you for all our audience who participated and talked to us. And I promise there will be another episode in Arabic with Azzam again to talk about this. He promised me off the air.
not in Arabic, بالعراقي.
بالعراق. There you go. بالعراقي. Okay. And Natasha and I will talk to you again
بالعراقي.
بالعراقي بالأردني
Okay.
in Jordanian and Iraqi to talk about the environment again. So thank you so
Cheers.
much, Azzam. And
All right.
thanks for Samah al-Dhahabi. She's telling you, mashallah, Engineer Alwash explains in a very interesting way. I hope the Arab world benefit from a knowledgeable expert like him. Thank you very much, Samah. So until we meet again, this is Zyad Tariq Rasheed from Ottawa, Natasha Tynes, and from Dr. Azzam. Goodbye.
Cheers.
Thank you very much. Bye.
Bye-bye.